meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, please be seated. You might be a preacher if you'd rather negotiate with terrorists than the church treasurer. The church picnic is no picnic. You've been tempted to take up an offering at a family reunion. You might be a preacher if you've ever wanted to give the sound tech some feedback of your own. You might be a preacher if you ever wanted to lay hands on a deacon and you weren't thinking of praying for him. Interesting turn of phrase. Yeah. You know, it was interesting putting together a sermon for this Sunday because there are many things that were said in the passages and many really famous quotes that I think lead us to find our humanity in good old Paul. Paul, what a complex guy. He was, I'm not sure I could have gone down to the local bar and had a beer with Paul. I don't know if I could have done that. Because he was really pretty, at least initially, until he had a chance, I think, to be around Christians in relationships. I don't think he really knew what to think about all this Christ stuff, you know? Because he was just a guy, just a man. But he was a powerful man. He was a Pharisee. And it's interesting because in this particular verses, or these set of verses, there are a lot of things that Paul says, and one of them that he talks about is a thorn in the flesh. Now, there's been all kinds of debate about what he meant by that. And I'll leave it up to you to sort out for yourself what it means, but I want you to think about it. This is a teaching tool. Whether we planned it or not, if we don't pay attention, it will really teach us. These are thorns. I mean, if Paul was talking about a thorn in his flesh, well, if these are the kind of thorns that they were used to in Israel, he must have had a serious situation, or at least one that hurt him enough that he needed to ask God's help for that. And so, you know, you get this feeling of ego from Paul a good part of the time. And yet then there are those moments when Paul is bearing himself to us, whether we really realize it or not. And I find that when I read this, there was something about the moment, about the prayers, about the meditation that I did. I ended up feeling really connected to Paul because he was talking about his shortcomings. And I can see in Paul the tension around needing to do the right thing And in his great degree of faith, he still appears confused to me in this passage about who he is. There's so much about him as a human being that we don't really know. It's about legend. But here when he's talking about his short givings, he says, therefore I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities for the sake of Christ. For whenever I am weak, then I am strong. You know, I hated those kind of sentences in graduate school. You know, it's like a double entendre. You know, yeah, you're this, but no, you're really this. But I know what he meant. I know what he meant. He's talking about his own confusion. And he's talking about having found the peace in Jesus Christ that helps him to understand even those conversations that he has in his head. Can't ever go home again, though. Especially if you're a prophet. Can't go home. I mean, you can go home physically, but are you ever really home again? Think about the time when you left home. Remember that? Might not have been a great time for you. But did you ever go back to where you were born and raised? To visit? I did. And to see if things had changed. And you know what? They changed. They really did. My life, I think, was really, really chaotic. But Christ also needed to make a point about faith, I believe. When Christ was talking about only being able to heal some folks, to me, the message he was sending was that faith was absent from a lot of folks, but not the ones who he healed. That faith is critical in terms of asking something in prayer and then waiting for an answer. And I don't think it matters a lot about how much faith you have. Christ sent the disciples out, and that's also talked about here in the verses, to do what would become their job, and some would die for it. What is your job? What is our job? I know I keep coming back to this when I preach. Our job is to carry the message of Christ's love to people in this community who don't get a chance to hear it. And to make this church a beacon to the African American community. That people can come here and know they'll be accepted and loved without question, no matter who they are. Because we come to church because we believe in all of this. Otherwise, it would be a big mess. If we didn't have just a little bit of faith to keep our spirits running. How many of you pray all day long? You know what? I found that as I've gotten older, I spend more time in conversation with God. Maybe it's because I have more time now that I'm retired, but I don't think so. Because I was in conversations with God all day before I ever retired. Over a period of years, it just became a habit. And along with that, I find myself laughing at myself even more and more. So what is this thing that we call old age that makes us so much more pliable in terms of opening our minds? It's because we want to love, and we don't like it if we can't love. And that's one of the dilemmas that Paul struggled with and found an answer to. How many of you watch TV and watch the news and find yourself saying, I hate it? Well, I do. And then I catch myself. I don't actually say it. That wouldn't be a good Christian thing to do. But it's how I feel. And I'm sad about that because I wish I could feel another way. Those are the dilemmas that Paul was talking about. Christ, faith, all these things we hear every Sunday, whether it's me preaching or someone else. You ever hear, we talked about shaking the dust off the feet when we leave a place where we're not welcome. You know who came up with that? Wasn't somebody in the Bible, it was Thomas Wolfe. Thomas Wolfe. He said, you could never go home again, but he also was able to state the obvious problem with anything that we try to do that we've left behind. We're supposed to move forward if we can. It's a hot day. And I'm probably going to go down and get me some green tomatoes, and then I'm going to go home. But every time I go home from here, I'm happy when I leave. Not because I'm leaving. I'm happy because I've been here. I'm happy because folks are warm, tender, they care. And even in this heat, here you are. God bless you. Amen.
Amen.